Cities 92.9. WRPW Colfax Bloomington Normal. Current news time is 7 o'clock. From private business owner to public service. And now to your radio. It's the Morning Rush with Lee Newcomb. With 92-second news and first alert weather every 15 minutes. Producer Sarah, your text and your calls. Now here's your host, Lee Newcomb.
On the air now. I'm sorry, it's your amateur radio host again. I'm trying to get used to this, folks. We have a very important election coming up in the 13th Congressional District. Rodney Davis is the incumbent congressman. The story behind the district is that 2 years ago, the congressman then, Tim Johnson, ran for the Republican nomination. He won the Republican nomination, and then almost immediately he withdrew from the contest. And so I believe it's 14 different counties that encompass the district. All are part of those counties. The county chairman met and looked at the candidates for the office and chose Rodney Davis, who has a long history in the Republican Party, had been an aide to Congressman Shimkus, and had been the executive director of the party, very well known in the party. They chose him as the candidate. Also competing at that time was Erica Harold, who put her name in the hat. And so this is the first candidacy. And Michael Firsching, actually, you ran for the office against Tim Johnson.
That is correct.
So we've introduced Rodney Davis, our second candidate for the office, Erica Harold. Erica is most well known for being Miss America in 2003. Is that correct?
Correct.
2003. And spoke at CPAC this weekend. That was exciting for us in Central Illinois to have one of our own speaking at CPAC.
Quite an honor.
We ran the cut a few minutes ago of your cut on the prison, which I thought was very touching about what we can do when our faith
Thank you.
touches us. And Michael Firsching, you are a veterinarian in the Champaign area, am I correct?
No, not in Champaign. I'm down Madison County.
Oh, Madison County.
Yes.
You're
We
a
can't
veterinarian?
claim everyone.
Yeah, my practice is in Edwardsville.
Edwardsville. I went to your website yesterday trying to get some information. There wasn't much there, so we'll get to know you as we go along.
There's a lot of information on the Facebook site.
Okay, on the Facebook site. I'd like to give each of you 2 minutes to get started, to tell why you think you should continue to be, and for the two of you, why you want to be the congressman for this district. Let's start with Rodney Davis.
Well, Lee, again, welcome. Congratulations on your new job.
Thank you. This is going to be great.
Congratulations. You were just telling us a story about one door opening after another one was closed, and that should be inspirational.
That's life, right? You didn't expect to be a congressman 3 years ago, did you?
I didn't expect to be a congressman 2 years ago. But you know what?
It happens.
It's a door that opened, and it's a door that I enjoy walking through every single day. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to be on your show. This is an opportunity that I don't take lightly. That is serving the constituents of the 13th District. Just slightly over a year ago, I was elected by the voters of this district to go to Washington and do one thing, and that's to govern. And I think my record over the last year and a half has shown that I'm doing just that. After being the first freshman to have a bill signed into law, but also working together in a bipartisan way to actually pass legislation like the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is crucial to this district, crucial to our farmers. And frankly, when you look at the economy, you look at the negative effects of some of these policies coming out of the Obama administration, the ag economy has been the bright spot. And to give our farmers certainty to keep that bright spot going has just been a great experience for me. And I also want your listeners to understand, too, that in the midst of this bipartisan agreement, we also put forth the largest cut in mandatory spending we've had this entire Congress. And I was one who helped craft that bill from its infancy through the committee process, through the floor, and then being a part of the conference committee allowed me to ensure that the hardworking taxpayers of this country are put forward, and put first. And that's exactly what I've done in Washington over the last year and a half, and that is exactly what I will continue to do when the voters send me back.
Thank you, Rodney Davis.
I'm getting through a little cold, so excuse my cough here, but that's exactly what I want them to do, or that's exactly what I intend to do when the voters will send me back.
Thank you, Rodney Davis, current congressman. Erica Harold, your opening statement.
Good morning. Well, it's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be running for this position. I was born and raised in Champaign-Urbana, and although I was probably most known for being Miss America, that happened about a decade ago. And
It did.
It did. Time
And you
flies.
don't look a bit different today than you did then.
That is very kind of you to say that, especially this early. But during the past decade of my life, I've been working on things that I think have uniquely equipped me for this position. First of all, I've been practicing law, part of which has encompassed a constitutional law practice. And one of the things that motivated me to run for public office is I don't see the constitutional rights being upheld in Washington, D.C. And I think it's very important that we send people to Washington who have a background in defending the Constitution, articulating its principles, and being able to talk about the positive aspects of limited government. I'm also running because I think that I am uniquely equipped to represent the diversity of this district. This is going to be a swing district, and I think that my background equips me to get a higher percentage of independent voters and Democratic voters, and that's essential in order to hold this seat. Finally, I want to go to Washington, D.C. to bring down the national debt. I would have voted against the last budget because it did very little to rein in wasteful spending and to actually deal with the drivers of our national debt. And it chose to target the very nominal cuts towards veterans' pensions. I think it's unconscionable. I would have voted against it. And I would go to Washington, D.C. to be serious about bringing down the national debt. Again, it's an honor to be part of this process. And I've been holding town halls throughout the district, in communities all throughout our district, trying to find out exactly what people want. People want someone who's willing to stand up for them, fight for them, and also be willing to be accessible and accountable to them.
Thank you. And our final candidate, Michael Firsching.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm bringing what I consider to be probably a unique perspective into this race, because I don't think it's just a race between Rodney Davis, Erica Harold, myself. It also includes the Democrats. In other words, I believe there should be a lot of independent voters who are participating in the primaries this year. In other words, people have to realize primary elections are not just for party people, they're for everybody. You need to be looking at all 6 candidates that are available in this election and finding one that really fits what your needs are. What I'm bringing is that I have the most varied life experience of anybody who's running for office, whether it's being in knowing medicine from being a veterinarian, working on a ranch, being a businessman. I have the broad breadth of experiences which I think will be very valuable in the race. Also, I'm bringing 2 unique things which I wish weren't unique for people running for Congress, is that I've really studied the heck out of the Constitution. I believe understanding and knowing the Constitution is very important. I've been participating in a Constitution Club for the last 8 years. We've gone over 600 Supreme cases to understand exactly not just the Constitution, but how it's interpreted. And I know more about the Constitution than 99% of the attorneys in this country and 99% of the people in Congress right now, unfortunately. And also the other thing that I bring is that I really understand economics. We have people going to represent us in Congress which do not understand the subject, and I think it's vital that people understand economics if they're going to be a good representative in the Congress.
Thank you. I think that something that 2 candidates mentioned, and I know you have the same concerns, Congressman Davis, this district is truly a swing district. This is one of the few districts in the United States which is really pretty much called a 50-50 district, which is why this is rated by almost everyone as one of the top 10 most watched districts in the United States. The Democratic nominee is likely at this point, from what the polls are saying, to be Ann Callis. She's the head judge in Madison County. She's articulate, she's attractive, she's going to be a very formidable candidate. Tell me why you are the best candidate to go up against her and what you can bring to the district that will make you the better candidate. We'll start with Erica.
Well, I think my background in terms of practicing law and being an attorney uniquely equips me to be able to draw the right distinctions against another person who's going to be bringing a legal perspective. Judge Callis is someone that I have great respect for as well, and she will be talking about ways in which she has tried to use the judicial system to make a positive impact in people's lives. I would be able to uniquely balance that by talking about the work that I've done on criminal justice reform measures. For the past 10 years, I've been involved in prison ministry, and I currently sit on the board of the late Chuck Colson's Prison Fellowship. We are involved in prisons throughout the country, not only trying to do ministry, but trying to look to see what works within the criminal justice system and what does not. And when the issues of criminal justice reform come up, I will be in a positive position to be able to talk about that from a Republican conservative perspective and talk about being positive stewards of the resources that taxpayers entrust to us. Finally, there are a lot of colleges and universities on this district, and I've made it a concerted effort to travel around and talk to them. Right now, a lot of young people are disenchanted with the political process, but if properly engaged, are willing to consider engaging. And I think that my background and I think my youth actually uniquely equips me to be able to reach out to them. Since I am from one of the largest counties within the district, Champaign County, there are a lot of relationships that I have that I think will enable me to get some crossover votes.
Very good. Michael Firsching, how are you the best candidate to address this district?
I really think that I'm the person, especially compared to Ann Callis, who really recognizes that we have lots of huge problems going on in the country. I believe her standpoint is that we just need more government and grow this government program, spend more money, that we're going to solve problems. Well, that attitude is the number one problem we have in the country. I can bring that forth because I understand that, and whether it's the...
So you don't think your opponents care about the issues the way you do?
I'm definitely the most conservative person physically who's running in this race. I think it's always wrong to spend money the government doesn't have. In other words, I don't want to reduce deficit spending. I want to eliminate deficit spending.
But how will you be the person to address this unique district in this election? What makes you the candidate that can appeal to the district?
Well, I guess, but I mentioned before, my diverse background is that I think this district fits me very well. In other words, we're a district that has a combination of metropolitan areas, lots of academia, and rural all combined. And that is my background. My mom comes from a background of being...
Let me ask you this. In the competitiveness of the campaign, how much do you expect that this campaign against Ann Callis would cost?
Well, I actually don't think that the money should be guiding how people vote.
Okay, but as Republicans, we're looking at who's going to be a competitive candidate, who can win the election. What kind of resources do you have behind you that could make you the standard bearer in the general election campaign?
I strongly disagree with the premise of your question.
Okay.
In other words, your premise is that the only way that people we should consider running for the people who are backed by big dollars. I think that's one of the biggest bamboozles we have in this country.
But how do we get our message out to people if we don't have some money to get behind them?
Because we have really good journalism, radio shows that host things such as debates.
Okay.
We also have a wonderful communication device called the Internet.
All right.
And anybody can find anything they want to about any of the candidates that's raced via the Internet. And they don't need the filters of big corporations of big bucks to determine who they're going to vote for.
Okay, Congressman Davis, how will you best address being the best general election candidate in the uniqueness of this district?
Well, let me first take a step back. I think it's presumptuous to assume that the Democrats are going to choose one candidate over the other based on polling, because if that's the case, then you have to assume, looking at the leads that I've had in all of the polling, that I'm going to be the nominee, and we don't need to be sitting here then at that point. But the primary is 8 days away, and let's let the voters of the Democrat Party choose who I believe I will be running against. I'm uniquely qualified to run against any of those Democrats because I've got a record of success. I ran for this office because I looked at my kids and I said, we have to do better. We have to do something to make sure that the next generation is better off than our generation. There are people that walked the halls of Congress years and decades before I got there that made decisions that we are paying for now and that our kids will have to pay for if we're not there to make the tough decisions. I'm uniquely capable of beating the Democrats here in this district because I've been doing it. I did it last year when I ran for this office, and I worked to make sure that we built Republicans and put Republicans into office throughout the 14 counties in this district over my political career. But I will tell you what makes me uniquely qualified is that I grew up in a small business family. You know, I watched my mom and dad work very hard. My dad go to a minimum wage job in 1959 and then worked his way up with that same company and then owned his own franchise, achieved the American dream after starting in that minimum wage job. He taught me, my mom taught me to value public service, because when we talked at the dinner table, we talked about how decisions in Washington and in Springfield affected the way they ran their business in Taylorville, Illinois, wondering whether or not they're going to be able to give a teenager their first job.
But that's what we appreciate that. But we were talking here about the district and how we appeal to the diverse people of the district.
Well, I think growing up in a small business family appeals to this district, Lee. I've traveled this district, lived in this district virtually my entire life. What appeals to this district is a hard-working American taxpayer. And what appeals to this district are those who are working hard every day like my mom and dad did in the towns like Taylorville. You know, you want to talk about the universities and colleges? I think all you have to do is look at my record of success in trying to reform some of the educational programs in this country. I've talked consistently, Lee, about making sure that we have better workforce development programs, because right now in Washington...
Let's get into that when we get into the economy, because we were just talking about the district there. Let's go into, first of all, reset the stage a little bit. We want to talk about foreign policy. This has been huge in the news in the last week. We have the Crimea that former Secretary of Defense Gates this weekend has, along with many others, former Vice President Cheney and others have said, it's virtually gone. The Russians, I've said in the radio show, I keep wanting to say the Soviets, because I feel like I'm replaying the history of the 80s that President Obama said they wanted their issues back. Well, we've got them back now. The Russians are being very aggressive. How should we address in our foreign policy, and how can the Congress affect the issue of the way the world is changing in many areas? Let's start with, I think we had Eric last time, Mr. Firsching.
I think Ukraine is a good thing as a current event to look at what we've been doing wrong in the past. I think we should have no action taken in Ukraine by the United States. We also shouldn't be providing foreign aid to Ukraine. We don't have enough money in this country. We're broke, and handing out $1 billion to a foreign land when we're hurting in this country it makes no sense at all to me.
Well, what's our influence there in the future?
Influence.
How do we influence that situation?
I think by being a good role model for how countries are supposed to be, correct?
Okay.
We always need to talk with people, but the use of the military force in the foreign lands and being a policeman is not the correct path to be taking.
Congressman Davis?
Well, I think what's happening in Ukraine is a reflection of the Obama administration's failed foreign policy. He's been dealing with Vladimir Putin in a way that I think has given Putin the impression that America is weak. And that's unfortunate, and I believe America should be engaged. I think what we should do is encourage countries in Europe, countries around the world to become energy independent, because the Russian government makes 50% of its revenues from selling natural gas and other natural resources to other countries. We have to encourage energy independence, and frankly, our next mission to the moon should be to make America energy independent so that we don't rely upon sources of foreign oil either.
Erica Harold, how should we affect the situation there and our foreign policy in the future?
I think first and foremost, there should be very stiff sanctions imposed, because I think that Putin has to be sent the message that the international community is not going to stand for this level of aggression. Secondly, I think we cannot pursue a posture of appeasement, because we have seen throughout history that that has not worked. And I do think the fact that the president set that line in Syria and then did nothing and chose to engage in foreign policy in a way that left both our allies sort of mystified and perhaps emboldened enemies has led us to this point in time. I'm not one who thinks that we should automatically leap to military intervention, because I think that that can pose some catastrophic consequences and can put us in a position where we are engaged in in areas where there's a lot of unrest. But I think that we have to send a very strong message, and I think the entire international community has to do so. It cannot just be the United States. Everyone has to send a message that this is unacceptable.
Our call-in line, if you have a question for our candidates, is 451-9299, and you can text your questions in at 807-1600. We have a caller now. Ed, welcome to our debate.
Yeah, I'd like to ask everybody who's running, basically the past two budget deals that the leadership of the House presented cut benefits to veterans, and I want to know if they approved of that and why congressmen actually voted for it, and also would they have done it the same thing, seeing that it's hurting the most important people, specifically veterans who depend on that money.
Thank you for your question. Congressman Davis, did you vote for the bill, and what was the reasoning?
Sure, I voted for the budget because it saved $24 billion and put us back on a pathway to get into our constitutional appropriations process rather than relying upon continuing resolutions, which the president and the leaders of the House and the Senate actually then spend all of the tax dollars that the hardworking Americans send to Washington. This gave us an opportunity to get back to that process, but one thing I found out about in Washington, no bill's perfect, and you have to make a judgment call. And there was a provision in that bill that would have reduced future COLAs to veterans who are at a young age. And I voted for the bill in spite of the fact that I was against that provision. And then what we've done since then is we actually fixed that provision. And that's exactly what you do in Washington. You make judgment calls and you take the good parts of that bill and you judge the totality of that piece of legislation. And then those negative parts, you go and you try and fix them. And I helped lead the charge to fix that. And next week, Lee, this week, I'm going to have a bill on the floor called the Hire More Heroes Act. It's going to change Obamacare. It's going to help small businesses because veterans who actually get their health care through the VA or if they're on active duty through the Department of Defense, they're not going to be counted towards the 50-employee limit that small businesses have to abide by within Obamacare. And what that's going to do is hopefully encourage small businesses to hire more veterans.
Erica Harold?
I would have voted no against the budget because it did very little to address what I consider to be the drivers of our national debt and deficits, which is the non-mandatory side of spending. And the spending cuts in typical Washington fashion, the cuts were set to go into effect 10 years down the road, and the spending increases actually we found right away. And I think it's unconscionable to have voted for something that cut veterans' pensions. And I would disagree with Congressman Davis. He was not the person who led the charge on restoring those benefits. I saw him interviewed, a quote of him was played on WICD, Channel 15 News, and he was actually defending those cuts and said that they would...
Untrue.
Hang on, we'll get to that.
That is not true.
We'll get to that in a minute.
He was justifying the cuts as saying that they would not apply to disabled veterans, and he said that they would be applying to people who could have a second job. And so I think it's a mischaracterization to say that he was the one who led it. Finally, I would say that if members of Congress fixed it, what was the point of having those cuts in the first place? Either they didn't read the bill carefully, or what I think happened is they understood after the American public responded negatively that this is unacceptable and went back and fixed it.
Congressman?
Well, first off, what my opponent says I said on television is that's just not true. Now what she's referring to, and I went back after another joint appearance that we had up in Chicago in front of the Chicago Tribune when she mentioned a TV interview that I did that justified these cuts, and I never had a TV interview that justified those cuts. And what she's saying is she went back and researched a story that was actually part of a bigger story, and I answered a question that the reporter asked me during an extensive portion of the interview that asked what impact would these have been if they're not fixed. And that's the quote they use, and that's where you say I justify having those cuts. That's where you say that I support these cuts. And that is just wrong and disingenuous and frankly dishonest.
Erica?
Well, I think the quote speaks for itself, and I think that I would say it was a justification. It said it would not apply to disabled veterans.
Explaining and defining
I'd like to finish. Congressman, I'd like to finish.
Congressman Davis,
interrupt you.
I gave you a good time. Let's let her respond.
I think that during the course of that interview, there was no call for cutting them back. The only comments made were talking about the fact that they would not apply to disabled veterans and the fact that people who are under the age of 62 would be in a position to have a second job. I call that a justification and not leading the charge to repeal those cuts.
This brings up another question for me, and this is something that I actually talked with the general manager of our station last night about this question because it appears to be negative towards someone, and it's not meant that way. We have some terrific candidates for Congress here, and we're having a very energetic discussion here. And if there were other opportunities for you to go at it, this is something that would have been worked out. This is something that Ms. Harold has said that you said something, you said, no, I didn't say that, and it's disingenuous. But we don't have an opportunity now to go back and hold people accountable, hold you accountable, hold her accountable, because this is the single only appearance or debate we're going to have for this entire district. And it's being held in a small portion of the district. The major media markets in Champaign, Springfield, Decatur are not going to have the opportunity to hear you candidates together, and I think that's a shame. Why, Congressman Davis, and I mean this respectfully, I'm not trying to bang you, but you have refused to debate your opponents anywhere in the district. Why?
Well, first of all, Lee, we're together at many joint appearances. We're together standing in front of Republicans at many Republican events and talking about the issues where we agree and the issues where we disagree. Frankly, you have members of the media outside this room.
But this is the only one.
This debate here will probably have will make sure that more people listen to your show on your opening day than what you ever would have had.
But this is the only one, and we won't have an opportunity next week to follow it up with another debate and talk about this very clash we had just a minute ago. Why wouldn't you debate your opponents?
I have been debating the issues with my opponents for 10 months. I'm going to continue to debate the issues, and frankly, I'm debating the issues in Washington, doing the job that the folks of this district sent me to Washington to do, which is to ensure that we fight against the overspending, we fight against what has been happening in Washington, we fight against the provisions that we just talked about during that last exchange. And I want to make sure that I say one more thing there too, Lee, so give me this opportunity. This is an opportunity to remind people not a single veteran ever or will have their pension cut. And for that discussion to get to this point just shows me that we need to actually have an honest discussion on the issues of spending, an honest discussion on the issues of debt, an honest discussion on the issues of the bills.
Erica Harold, your turn.
Well, I mean, I would object to the characterization or the inference of dishonesty. I stand by what I said. I think it's important to have debates because this is the first time that the voters of this district will ultimately be deciding the nominee. Last time it was decided by county chairman. And back in November, I sent Congressman Davis an invitation to debate throughout the district because it's ultimately not about any one of us and whether our political interests are served by participating. It's ultimately about giving voters the ability to be able to assess us, to be able to engage, and be able to engage us in a joint way. And so I think it's important to have those, and I'm disappointed that we were not.
Let's move on to our military. We've seen some cuts this week that Secretary Hagel has announced that are tragic in terms of what they do to our military. Explain what has been happening to the military budget and how you believe the Congress ought to respond to it, how you as a congressman will respond to it. Let's start with Michael Firsching.
Well, I think this question really ties into the very important question the last caller addressed. When we're making cuts, what are we supposed to be cutting? Are we supposed to be cutting veterans benefits? What are we supposed to be cutting the military? And my position would be is when we don't have money, we should not be expecting to borrow it or have the Federal Reserve printing up for us to do.
So you would support the military cuts?
I would say everything in the budget needs to be cut except veteran benefits. I think that should be excluded.
But we're talking about military expenditures here. There's been huge cuts in military.
It's all part of the big picture. In other words, you can look at one small spot of the budget, but the entire budget has to be looked at. We can't continue to spend money we don't have.
All right.
Does the military budget need to be cut? Yes. Do social programs need to be cut? Yes. We don't have money for all this.
Okay. Erica Harold, on the military cuts, what's your opinion of what has been happening with the military cuts?
I'm concerned about them because I think that our country has to maintain the strongest military in the world. It's important in terms of ensuring our own peace and prosperity as well as those of our allies. And I know that there is a proposed reduction of military forces, and there's also a proposed reduction in benefits. And I'm concerned that we don't have an overall strategic force that's going to enable us to continue to have the proper resources and the proper troops necessary to be able to defend ourselves and our allies.
Congressman Davis.
Well, I happen to agree with Ms. Harold. I think that we need to ensure that our military does not take the brunt of any spending cuts in Washington, especially when you look at what's happening in the Ukraine. What we also need to look at, though, is the fact that we're getting back to being able to spend money in Washington in a way that reprioritizes how Washington spends money. There's a lot of talk about the Constitution at this table. Well, I've actually acted, and we made sure that we returned to our constitutional appropriations process, because under this entire Obama administration, the Obama administration has worked off of continuing resolutions, which gives him the opportunity to take the purse strings away from Congress. We've taken them back, and when that happens, we're going to continue to actually reprioritize our spending so that those who are actually in support of the military can agree with me that we're going to continue to fund the military so that America is not put at a disadvantage when it comes to world affairs.
We have been cut back in the military to, I believe, the number of actual shooters. I'm sorry, we're ready for a break. We'll be back. This is Lee Newcomb on Cities 92.9 FM, the news and talk of Wilmington Normal, and we'll be back in just a few minutes to continue this debate for the 13th.
10-8 is police code for ready to serve and protect. And at 10-8 Outfitters, so are we. And now you can be too.
Agitator, flamethrower, hellraiser. It could only be Mark Levin.
After Illinois Watchdog Radio on Cities 92.9. Miss a show? Get the podcast at cities929.com.
Welcome back. This is Lee Newcomb on Cities 92.9 FM, the news and talk of Wilmington Normal. We're talking with our three candidates for United States Congress in the 13th Congressional District. Our candidates are the incumbent Congressman Rodney Davis, Erica Harold, Harvard Law graduate and former Miss America, grew up and lives now in Champaign where she's a practicing attorney, and Michael Firsching, who is a veterinary doctor, and you are down in the southern part of the district, Edwardsville, I think you said?
That is correct.
Yes, okay. We've talked about foreign policy, some of our military. Let's get into the economy. In the economy, we have been sputtering along now for 5 years since the recession started. The presidency is not seem to be doing a lot to handle this very well. There is a potential, many think a good potential, that we will have a Republican House and Senate in the next Congress. If we get a House and Senate, what do you think Republicans ought to do to address the economy? Let's start with Erica Harold.
There are a couple of key things. I think if Republicans hold both the House and the Senate, then I think that's the time to start to address the big drivers of national debt, which would be entitlement reform. I think that once we start to do that, we can actually start to bring down the national debt, and that's important. The other group, though, that I think that it's important to focus on is the long-term unemployed. If you look at the recovery of the economy, it's been uneven, and there have been certain populations that have had a difficult time rejoining the workforce. And so that's an area where I think tax credits would be appropriate to give employers incentive to hire those long-term unemployed, because ultimately, if we cannot reintegrate them into our workforce, we're going to be making significant expenditures in terms of benefits as well. And everyone benefits when people are able to be fully engaged in the workforce.
Congressman?
Well, you mentioned the economy, and I think we can all agree that the economy and a lack of economic growth under the Obama administration has just been a disaster. I represent the county with the highest unemployment in the state. That's Macon County in Decatur. I mean, that's home to a huge Caterpillar facility. It's home to ADM and their headquarters, and it's home to Tate and Lyle. It's home to so many different larger businesses, and that community should be growing. But unfortunately, what we've seen is a policy in Washington that has discouraged investment in the American economy and investment in the American worker. And what I'm trying to do in Washington is actually fix things at the workforce investment level too, because right now, the way Washington has worked in the past, they actually incentivize workers to stay on unemployment rather than going back and getting the training they need for a job that's available. If you wouldn't believe this, and I didn't believe this, Lee, when I started running for office. But if somebody is laid off from Caterpillar and always wanted to be a teacher, I graduated from Millikan University 25 years, or just a little over 22 years ago, and if there was somebody that was in school with me there and left and had to go...
Let me bring you back to our question. What should Congress do?
I'm telling you what Congress is doing, but I want to describe the problem too, Lee.
Okay.
The problem is the way Washington's set up is that it encourages an individual who would have been in school with me, who would have decided to go into the workforce and maybe always wanted to be a teacher. But they decided to stay and work at CAT to raise their family. Well, if they were laid off, they couldn't go back and finish their degree, even on their own dime, without the federal government telling them that they can't have their unemployment. I think that's an important point for your listeners to understand why Washington's so broken, because Washington incentivizes people to stay on unemployment, and I've introduced bills that would change that, and I'm going to continue to push that, and that's exactly why I'm starting to work on Obamacare, too, to ensure that our small businesses are actually going to be able to hire veterans and be encouraged to hire veterans by the introduction of my Hire More Heroes Act that's going to be on the floor of the House this week.
Michael Firsching?
Wow, this to me is issue number one in the entire race and should be across the country. The economy is being choked down with debt. We have a Federal Reserve System that is printing up money and handing out to wealthy people all around the world. We're in big time trouble when it comes to the economy. We're making absolutely no progress since 2008, since we had the huge collapse almost at that point. They kind of papered over by printing up money, but it has not solved any problems whatsoever. We need to have a completely different type of Congress than we have. We have a Republican Congress in right now. Unfortunately, it's spending more money than any Congress ever has before. We are clogged with corporate-backed people in both the Democratic and Republican Party. We need to build on the small nucleus of Republicans that exist in Congress now that believe in constitutional government. They believe in limited government. They believe that deficit spending is always wrong, and they have an opportunity in this district to elect someone who thinks like that, and that would be myself.
That brings us into a good question that one of our texters has sent in, said, what federal program would you be willing to work on completely cutting? Erica Harold?
I wouldn't be working on completely cutting, but I think reforming entitlements, specifically Social Security, is very important. I think it has to be sustainable and solvent, and right now Congress has not been very serious about addressing it because obviously it's politically sensitive. But doing nothing is putting us in a position when in 2032 we would have to reduce benefits. So that'd be an area where I think we have an obligation to begin to reform, because we have to make sure that people who have invested and are counting on it are able to do so, and younger workers have the kind of predictability that they're entitled to as well.
Now I can just hear the commercial in the general election, as I know you can hear it playing in
Absolutely.
your head right now.
Absolutely.
Erica Harold wants to put grandma over the cliff and wants to cut your Social Security. Do you want to cut Social Security?
I want to make sure it's sustainable and solvent, and so I think that younger workers like myself, I just turned 34, I think we should raise the retirement age for people my age, because it gives us the ability to be able to make the long-term plans. For people close to retirement, I would not cut it. And I knew that this was politically sensitive before saying it, but to me, that is one of the biggest issues that's driving our debt, and I was not going to run for office unwilling to talk about the really important things that matter in our country.
Congressman Davis, what's the federal program that you would most want to reform or get rid of?
Well, as somebody who's actually had those commercials run against him, I understand what your question was and your comments with Ms. Harold. But to answer the caller's question, I'd make sure that we wouldn't have any more cylinders of the world where taxpayer dollars, billions of taxpayer dollars have been wasted on so-called green energy projects that never amounted to much and basically have amounted to the generations that follow us having to pay for those decisions.
So what department would you go after?
Well, you asked
That's
a program.
probably-
That's a program within the
Or
Department of
departments.
Energy.
So you
And,
go
and
after
your
Department of Energy.
questioner asked what
Sure.
program would you cut, and that's the one I.
Right. Are there other things in the Department of Energy that you think we ought to go for?
Well, there are things in every department. I mean, there are people that sit in concrete buildings a few blocks away from my office.
I know you walk the mall there, and you see that great big massive Department of Energy building, and you wonder, what do they do in there?
Well, I don't do that with just the Department of Energy.
They keep
I
us
do it
from
with
getting
many
energy,
others.
don't they?
Well, in many cases they do, and that's why I talk about energy independence. But we also have to look at the EPA, and I've got a record of actually making sure that the EPA is reined in when it comes to adverse regulatory environment that's leading to our crippling economies. I hope your listeners understand that this administration is putting forth new rules and regulations against existing coal-fired power plants that are going to raise the cost of energy for every family, the poorest of the poor families too. And you know what it's going to cost? It's going to cost some of the best paying jobs in small communities that I represent. And it's wrong, and that's why I continue to fight it, Lee.
This district, that brings up a great point about this district. Illinois is the Saudi Arabia of coal.
Yes.
How do we release that? Let's start with Michael Firsching.
I kind of like that last question being more important.
Which department to get rid of?
Yes.
Go
In
ahead.
other words, what things to get rid of. The list, I would begin, we would eliminate foreign aid. I would eliminate the Department of Education. I would eliminate the Department of Commerce. I would eliminate the Department of Energy. I also would...
I hear a lot of people cheering out there.
I also end corporate welfare, such as we have in the Farm Bill that's just passed. Those are all things we can just plain eliminate.
Erica Harold, we were talking about coal a minute ago. How do we release Illinois coal to become the viable energy alternative it should be?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to fight against some of the administration's regulation that seek to prevent that from happening. And I think probably everyone at the table would agree that the Obama administration has not been very receptive to this. And so I think dealing with the regulation is first and foremost the most important thing. But after that, then I think the free market should be able to work within our energy sector. I think part of the problem with the way our energy policy works is that the government seeks to pick winners and losers, and it's really the free market that should be driving, because there's not just going to be one source of energy that's going to be sufficient for, or the panacea for our entire country. It's going to have to be driven regionally. It's going to have to be driven by the free market. And so I think the federal government should step out of the way and let the free market work.
Congressman Davis, Illinois coal.
I couldn't agree more. We have to make sure government doesn't pick winners and losers. We have to make sure that the free market's able to produce energy, and that's why I've called for, again, our next mission to the moon should be to make America energy independent. We have the resources, and what we've seen out of this administration is their ability to actually kill America's energy advantage that we have over the rest of the globe. All this administration has to do is look to Germany, who went to what they thought was a totally green economy. They shut down nuclear plants like the one I represent in Clinton. They shut down coal plants like the one I represent in Coffeen, Illinois, and Kincaid, Illinois. They shut them down. And you know what happened? The projections for the cost of doing that went up over 5 times. Almost over half of the Germans became energy poor because they were spending so much more in their utility bill just to actually turn on the light switch.
And we know where they're getting their gas, don't we?
We do. And you know what they're doing now to combat that? They're combating that by building 6 new coal-fired power plants. And that's what we need to do in America.
Let's move on to health care. Now, I have little doubt that if I were to ask you what you think of Obamacare, we would all agree it's a complete disaster. But let's say Republicans get the Congress next year. Now, the president's probably going to veto just about anything that could be passed. Do you think the Republican Congress should work with President Obama to reform Obamacare? Or do you think we ought to just try and hang in there that we're going to kill this thing when we elect a new president? How should we work with the president? How should the House leadership work with the president if we get a Republican Congress? Let's start with Michael Firsching.
Well, I really do think the federal government being involved with our health care is unconstitutional. That was the basic premise of government. The federal government was designed to be a federal government, not a national government. They are not supposed to be dealing with internal domestic situations and problems in the country. That's something reserved to the people or their states. So any sort of federal-run health care is a bad idea.
Erica Harold, how should the Republican Congress, if we have that, work with the president?
Well, specifically on the issue of the Affordable Care Act, I don't think it's a bill that can be reformed. When we look at the consequences throughout the district of people losing plans they liked, having to pay increased premiums, and I think we're going to see the full effect of it when the employer mandate goes into place and you have the group health insurance market ultimately distorted, I think it's fundamentally flawed.
And that all happens after the election, of course.
Right. I mean, and your listeners can take from that what they will. But the reality is it's a series of interlocking mandates, and starting to tinker with specific aspects of the program doesn't deal with the fundamental flaw, which is that the mandates placed upon individuals and employers that ultimately actually hurts job incentives in a time in which we need to be creating jobs. And
would you support a lot of smaller bills to take care of those things then?
If it involved just tinkering with the Affordable Care Act, I would not, because I think the goal is to be constructive as a member of Congress. But the reality is this is a bill that has changed fundamentally since it was passed. It has been done so in a unilateral way in which members of Congress are not even able to be engaged, in which the people who need to be held accountable are not really going to be able to do so at the ballot box, because the real effects go into effect later. And so I think this is an area in which I think Republicans have to vote no, but I think they also need to be willing to put forth their own ideas.
So you'd rather have the standoff at the OK Corral with the president, and it's all or nothing?
When you're talking about something that deals with 1/6 of the economy, and you're talking about something that is having a negative impact on job growth, on affordability, and on accessibility, I'd have to vote no.
Rodney Davis.
Well, we've had that standoff at the OK Corral you're talking about over health care, and I am somebody who has made no secret that I want to see Obamacare defunded, repealed, replaced with a much better system, and I think that should be our goal. What we've seen in Washington right now, and you mentioned earlier about it looks likely that we'll have a Republican Senate. Well, I hope that's the case. I'm not nearly as sure as you are, and I'm not nearly as sure that the Democrats aren't going to make a push.
Oh, no,
Obama's administration.
I know we can screw it up very easily. We've done that so well in the past.
But this is where the president is isn't forced to make a decision, because Harry Reid and Dick Durbin and the Democrats in the Senate, they withhold our changes. They don't even call them for a vote, so the president doesn't even have to use his veto pen.
But if we have a Republican Congress, what should the Republican leaders be doing to challenge the president?
What we should do is repeal this and replace it with a system that actually would allow insurance to be sold across state
We
lines.
all agree on that, but he's going to veto that. So should we work with him to make incremental changes?
We should work to make sure that the changes are made so they don't affect the hardworking taxpayers of this country. And let me tell you, this bill has not been implemented as it was written, because the president himself has offered thousands of waivers to many of his political allies and donors. The president himself is making unilateral decisions, as Ms. Harold even acknowledged, and as Mr. Firsching acknowledged, unilateral decisions that are actually going to delay that actually do the things that we passed bills that would have been codified.
So I think I hear you saying that where Erica Harold says she would just draw the line and say, no, we need to dump it and not work the president on incremental changes. I think I'm getting the impression that you're saying we should work with the president on incremental changes if we have that ability.
If the changes he made unilaterally are changes that positively affect the ability of Americans to get affordable health care coverage and get coverage, which is what the original Obamacare when it was instituted, actually cut the amount of insurance coverage for people against the promise of President Obama.
I'm sorry, sir, but I'm still not getting the idea.
No, the absolute
Do you believe we should work with the president on incremental changes or not?
I believe that we should actually fix whatever we can with Obamacare, and I'm going to continue to do that, and that means my incremental change that's going to be announced this week, I think is a great change, because we're going to ensure that the American people understand some of the absurdities of this law.
I understand that, but I'm still not getting a sense from you. I asked a simple question. You do believe, therefore, that the Republicans should be presenting bills for incremental changes to the Affordable Care Act. Am I right?
I'm presenting one this week called the Hire More Heroes Act, Lee. Yes, it is a change to Obamacare. I don't know how much more clear that can be.
Okay. In the economy, our job performance is really poor. What can we do to increase that? That is, once again, something that the Congress may work with the president on. Start with Erica Harold.
One of the things that I think needs to be addressed that we haven't talked about so much is our education system, and I would like to see more local control, because I think having more local control of education would give schools the ability to tailor the skills that students are graduating with to the job market actually within their region.
So educational an emphasis for you.
Educational emphasis with local control.
Okay, 30 seconds, Michael Firsching.
Well, our country is being strangled by overregulation and the government trying to manage us too much. We have some really brilliant people who are capable of producing all sorts of great things. If we can get the yoke off of government trying to do too much like they are now, so that the private economy can start flourishing, lower the hurdles so that entrepreneurs can start businesses, you'll start seeing a lot more people being hired.
Rodney Davis. 30 seconds. We've got to get into finals.
Yeah, we need to continue to fight the Obama administration and the overregulation and the lack of a vision when it comes to economic growth in this country. We need to unleash the American worker once again and unleash the American capital, invest in equipment, inventory, and most importantly, people.
We've appreciated your appearance here this morning. We now have 2 minutes each where we're going to give you a final chance to wrap it up. Let's begin with Michael Firsching.
Well, as you heard through discussions here, that one of the things brought up was money. It takes a lot of money to run for office, and that's a prerequisite to be a good representative for Congress. I reject that entirely, and I hope that voters out there who do get out and vote in the primaries also. It's very important that you have people who are independent, know the subject matter, are smart, and are principled to represent you. If they need stamp approval to get funds from all the businesses who are making tons of money out of this collusion with government to be okay to be voted for into office, we have a huge problem in this country. You need to go out there, vote for independent people, and we can get the country going back on a principled basis.
Erica Harold, your final statement.
Being able to participate in this campaign and meet the great people throughout this district has been one of the great privileges and honors of my life. Being able to meet people throughout the district who care about their country and are willing to work hard to make changes is something that is so important. And we've talked a lot about the problems within our country, but one of the things that stands out is that I think people throughout this district are united in some key values. First and foremost, they do want our economy to improve, and they understand the need to start to reduce our debt and reduce deficit spending. If you send me to Washington, D.C., I will do that. I think people also understand the need to distinguish between false compromise and truly working together on issues where we can find common ground. So on issues where I have a principled stand against something like the Affordable Care Act, I'll vote no. But when there are things that I think we can work together genuinely in a bipartisan way, such as criminal justice reform and finding ways to improve schools and empowering local governments to be able to make those decisions, I will do so. And fundamentally, I will be the kind of member of Congress who will be accessible and accountable to you. I will continue to hold open town halls where anyone can come, regardless of whether you contribute to me or not. I will do that because I think that's what we the people means, and that's what I'd be committed to.
And finally, Congressman Rodney Davis, your closing statements.
Well, Lee, thank you again, and great first day. Thank you to Mr. Firsching and Ms. Harold for a great race. This is going to be an interesting week up until the next primary on Tuesday, and I would urge all voters to go vote, and I hope I can earn your vote, because I think I've been somebody who came into this process a year and a half, actually about 2 years ago, and was elected a year and a half ago on a campaign to govern in Washington. And I think my record clearly shows that I'm somebody who's going to not sacrifice my core values and my core principles and ensure that we put America on a pathway to prosperity once again. I ran for this office because of my family. My wife, Shannon, is a nurse, and she is my best friend and biggest supporter. My daughter is a 17-year-old junior at Taylorville High School, and I have twin boys in junior high in the same town in 7th grade, and I don't want them to have to deal with decisions that are going to be punted to their generation, like decisions were punted to me as a new member of Congress. Now, as a small-town kid from Taylorville, Illinois, Lee, it is a privilege to walk the halls of Congress and have this opportunity to take the voices of Central Illinois out to Washington and govern. And we've done a great job in doing that. There's more to be done, though. Washington's broken. We know that. And I will not, 20 years from now, have my daughter, my sons, or my grandchildren at that time come to me and say, "Dad, Grandpa, I thought you fixed that when you were there." We're going to have to make tough decisions in Washington, D.C., Lee. And those are some of the tough decisions that we're making now, hence the criticism I've gotten from my opponents throughout this campaign and today. And what we have now is an opportunity to send me back to Washington to continue the record of success. And I would urge everybody to go vote on March 18th, and I hope I earned your vote once again.
Now I have an interesting problem. The problem is I budgeted 2 minutes for each one of you, and I've got politicians sitting in front of me who took less time than I gave you.
We have to be efficient.
How does that work? I just got a text from my producer, Sarah, saying you have to fill another 2 minutes.
It's that good fiscal conservatism coming.
Isn't it really?
That's right,
Really?
conserving resources to give you time to finish.
And I want to tell you something that I'm like a lot of people. I'm really bothered about a lot of stuff that goes on in politics. I'm bothered about the kind of people that we see so much of that are narcissistic, self-interested. It's all about me and being elected. And I hope that whichever one of you either continues to be our congressman or is our new congressman, remember it's the people in the district. And remember it's not about who's in Washington, and it's not about all of the goings-on with the power. And, you know, we hear about John Boehner, and people are ticked off at John Boehner, and you know, they aren't doing enough, or they're doing too much. But remember, it's about us in the district. And we look to you to represent us in Washington. We really do. And there are so many times when we can backbite at each other and we can disagree about politics. And when it's all said and done, it's our heritage for the future that you are there to represent. Don't look at the politics. Don't look at the leadership. Don't look at what committee chairmanship. Look back to your district. Look back to this district, which covers so much of what America is: agricultural, business, corporate employers, and the farmers, and some of the inner city people. Those are the people that depend upon you. And if you're in Congress, we will depend upon you to represent us. Not John Boehner, not Mitch McConnell, not any of those guys, but us. And please keep that in mind. This is Lee Newcomb on Cities 92.9 FM, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal, and we thank our three candidates for the 13th Congressional District for coming today and exposing themselves to our questions and yours. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll be analyzing this debate and others at that time. This is Lee Newcomb. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next is Glenn Beck. Good morning.